Well, if you would, open up your Bibles to Esther chapter 5. Verses 9 through 14 is our text today. So we're halfway through Esther. We have 8 more weeks in Esther. I hope you're enjoying it. I know I am. We've kind of reached the climax with our text today and next week in seeing God come out and begin to deliver his people in a profound way. And I think I've really been blessed by the text today, and I hope you will be as well. So our text today, again, is Esther chapter 5, verses 9 through 14. A few years ago, I went to visit a friend at their house, and we were sitting around the kitchen table, talking, enjoying each other's company, and a car drove into the driveway. And so as we sat there and waited to see who it was, there were 2 people in the car, and they got out, and all of a sudden my friend got excited because they were 2 of his oldest friends who had showed up to visit him. So it was an exciting time, and he was excited to introduce me to them. And so they came into the house, and we began to talk, and then things shifted. That's the best thing I could tell you, is we're sitting around the table, and people are talking, and the conversation took a different direction than I expected it to take. And they were talking about things and about people and about things that just made me very uncomfortable. I was looking for the exit. I was looking for that off-ramp for me to be able to get out of that house as fast as I could. The discussion was going in places that I did not like and I did not feel comfortable with. And the thing that made it worse was they cloaked it all in Christian language, claiming to be Christians and talking as though they were speaking for the Lord when they were talking about things that were very, very bad in my opinion. As I made my way to my car and got into the car and drove off that day, I concluded 2 things. And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I will be dramatic in what I say. First of all, I realized that was a demonic conversation. The things that they were talking about was demonically inspired, nothing less than that. And the second thing I realized was that conversation really came from prideful, arrogant, conceited hearts. Now, the reason I bring that story up this morning is because as we read through our text today, you're going to feel as though we're sitting around a table and a conversation starts to happen, and you should feel pretty uncomfortable about the way that this conversation goes. It should be natural for you to hear this conversation and begin to think to yourselves, this is demonic. This is not good. This is not healthy. This is not right. There should be something in you that kind of wells up on the inside and says, where's the exit? How can I get out of this place? And there should be something in you that says, this is coming from a prideful, arrogant, conceited heart. The mouth opens, and now we get to see what is actually in the heart. And the thing about our text today is this discussion is being had around a group of people, and nobody seems alarmed. Nobody seems threatened by what is being discussed. And that's somewhat shocking when you stop and think about it, because there's no wise counsel that's going to be given around this table. There is no wise words or good counsel that is given to direct this person in a good way. No, it is all bad. And it leads and culminates to a discussion leading them to want to kill somebody, an innocent man, a righteous man who's done nothing wrong. So it's a horrible conversation. And what we're going to see in the text today is all of this discussion kind of climaxes, and we get to see prideful, arrogant, conceited, murderous hearts that just come alive because of the way people are talking and what they're finding pleasure in that moment. So let me ask a question. Who can deliver the righteous from such conversations? Who can deliver the righteous when people sit around their kitchen tables and plot and plan these sort of things? Who can deliver the righteous when around boardrooms all across the world there are these types of conversations going on and nobody stands up and says, this is not right. This is going in a direction that is not righteous. Who can deliver in those moments? Who can deliver when around the break rooms in our communities, at our jobs, these kind of conversations are going on all the time? Recently, my daughter and I went to one of our favorite places to go on Monday mornings and to spend some time together, and we were kind of hidden behind some stuff, and there were 4 people behind the counter that probably didn't know we were there. Nobody else was there, and the conversation they were having was just bad. Foul language, gossip, malice, all kinds of stuff. And finally, I just couldn't take it anymore, so I just stood up just to let them know I was there. And then it toned down just a little bit. But who's going to protect the righteous when those sort of conversations start to happen? Who's going to protect the righteous when around the political tables of power, these sort of conversations are being had all the time and nobody seems to know that they exist? Or even if they do, how can you stop the plans that are being made there? And our text today, and really the entire book of Esther, reminds us that the Lord hears these conversations, that the Lord hears every detail of the plotting and the planning. He sees the conceited heart, the prideful heart, the arrogant heart, the murderous heart. He knows about all these things, and God will respond. And that ought to encourage us. Because around the table that we hear this conversation going on today, we will discover that Haman is pleased with the advice that he receives. He takes pleasure in this moment, being told that he can erect a gallows on which somebody, a righteous man, will be killed. This is a man who takes pleasure in that. That's horrifying, is it not? It's terrifying. And nobody else around that table was uncomfortable sitting there, giving that advice or seeing his pleasure in it. But in that moment, we have to remind ourselves that Haman does not know Proverbs 16, verse 5. Everyone who is arrogant in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured, he will not go unpunished. Haman does not know Proverbs 3:34. Towards the scorners, he, the Lord, is scornful, but to the humble, God gives favor. Haman does not know James chapter 4, verse 6, which says, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So that's why he can take pleasure in this moment, because he doesn't think he's accountable to anybody other than the king of Persia, and he's pretty sure the king of Persia will give him permission to do this. So let's look at our text this morning, Esther chapter 5, verses 9 through 14. This is what it says. And Haman went out on that day joyful and glad of heart. If you remember the text last week, he was invited to a party. He was the only official that was invited to go to this party. And there he got to be with the king and the queen. That's what it's referring to there. And Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced himself above all the officials and servants of the king. Then Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she had prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. Yet all of this is worth nothing to me so long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, this is where it gets really hard to read if you really just think about it. Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made. That's 70 feet tall. Let that be made in the backyard. Let that be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it, and then go joyfully with the king to the feast. And this idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. Really, if you just stop and spend any time at all thinking about this text, it is horrifying that these kind of conversations can happen. And yet we see it happen, and we know it happens all the time. As I sat down to look at this text, one thing caught my attention fairly early on. This text is one big chiasm. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the word chiasm, but the definition is going to pop up here. A chiasm is a literary device in which a sequence of ideas is presented and then repeated in reverse order. And the result is a mirror effect as the ideas are reflected back in the passage. And people use chiasms to emphasize certain points. They're used to draw our attention to something the author is wanting us to see. So he repeats himself to emphasize it. He wants us to know that something is very important in this text. And the thing with the chiasm is it climaxes in the middle oftentimes. And when it climaxes, you kind of get the main point, one of the main takeaways that the author wants you to get from a text. And so if I were to color code our text to kind of show us the chiasm, it would look something like this that's going to pop up here. You have chiasm number 1, starting at the beginning of the text. It has to do with the joyful and glad heart of Mordecai. And then at the end, he's got to try and recover that because he's lost it. He sees Mordecai and he loses his joy. So this whole story is about him trying to recover his joy in that moment. And so the last part, the first and the last, have to do with how he's going to go about getting his joy and his gladness back, his pleasure back. And so that's the first one. The second one we see in the green. The third one we see in the red. And then in the middle, the climax, picture a pyramid. So you're working your way up. Blue, green, red. Then you hit the top of the pyramid. That's the main point that really I think the author is trying to get us to look at, because this really reveals the proud heart, the arrogant heart, the conceited heart. It shows us what Haman is really trusting in, what he values, what gives him significance, and it's all external stuff. It's all in his kids, it's in his money, it's in his promotions, it's in that sort of stuff, and that stuff never lasts. They always promise us joy. They always promise us pleasure, but one event can change that. One bad day on the stock market can change all that. So it climaxes there, and so that's really how I've put this sermon together, and we're going to leave this up for you guys just to see for a while. But the 4 chiasms that we have in this text are this. First, Haman's disposition is stressed in the first one. He's joyful. He's glad, and at the end, he's pleased because he's come up with a plan to be joyful and glad again and to be able to enjoy all these external things. That's the first one. The second one is that his anger, we see his anger at Mordecai. So Mordecai is stressed in the second one, at the top and at the bottom. He's angry. He's wrathful against a man. He's murderous against Mordecai. That's brought out in the second one. The third one is he talks about an invitation in both of those. One, he's inviting all of his friends to come and have a pity party with him because now he's not in a good mood anymore. So he's invited his wife and his friends to talk about it. The second invitation that we see is when he reflects upon the fact that he's been invited of all the officials, of all of the people, the servants of the king, just he was invited to be at these 2 feasts with the king and Esther. And then it climaxes when Haman reflects upon what he values most. And in this section, we see his prideful heart, his self-centered heart, his arrogant heart. And here's the key to this section is Haman's problem really is not Mordecai. He thinks that's the problem because he lost his peace and his joy and his happiness, his gladness in that moment when he saw him. But his real problem is actually a heart problem. And he refuses to deal with his heart. So he's left with, the only way to answer this is I have to murder this guy. I have to kill this guy. And he tries to think about all of his accomplishments to try and regain some of this. But his real need that he needs to do in this moment is to repent and to humble himself before God. So let's look at these 4 things. The first one is this, Haman's disposition. Look at how our text begins in verse 9. And Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. This is how the first of the chiasm starts. Haman went out that day glad, joyful and glad of heart. We all love parties, right? I mean, I'm not a big party person really, but if somebody throws the party and I get to be involved in it, it's always pretty fun. It's fun to be there and interact with people, and when you leave, you're happy. But oftentimes, man, it does go away pretty quick when you leave the party. All parties have to end, and when it leaves, sometimes it's hard to maintain the joy and the gladness and the fellowship that you had during the party. While we're at the party, we feel joy, we feel gladness, we're excited about things, but then we have to leave, and we have to go back to our real life, and we have to experience the things that we were kind of alienated from when we went to the party, and that's exactly what's happening to him here. In fact, this is so predictable in our lives that we have sayings that kind of talk about this. For example, well, I was slapped back into reality. Somebody might say something like, the honeymoon period was over before I left the church. So we know what this feels like, to have these high moments and then immediately to be snapped back to reality, to all of a sudden realize the honeymoon period is over. And I think our takeaway from this is simple. A life without faith and a life that does not grab onto the grace of God is devoid of any true lasting joy and gladness. You can try and find these things and all of these other things. You can try and let alcohol do it for you, or some addiction do it for you, or some relationship do it for you. You can try and find your happiness and gladness in your job. But in the end, these things cannot, apart from grace and faith, provide lasting joy, peace, and happiness. We have to grasp the gospel every day of our life and hold on to it and to preach it to ourselves. Perhaps Haman is shocked in this moment when all of a sudden he just leaves the party. He hasn't even gotten out of the king's gate, and it's gone. It's evaporated that quick. It's kind of shocking. The alcohol has worn off. We saw that in chapter 1. The king was having a merry old time until one command wasn't followed, and all of a sudden he's angry. Alcohol can't give you true joy and gladness. He loses it. And all of a sudden, everything in this text goes to try and recover that joy and gladness. In fact, look at verse 13. He recounts all of these wonderful blessings in his life, but his response to this is, all of this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting in the king's gate. He's an arrogant, prideful, selfish man who thinks all of his problems are external. They're not internal. They're not a heart issue. All the problems are somebody else and what they're doing to me. It's not my own heart. I think one of the takeaways for us in this section is political power cannot bring joy and happiness to your life. Political power cannot satisfy the cravings that you have. Celebrity power, as much as culture wants to tell us celebrity power gives us these things, or celebrity status gives us these things, it can't give you joy and gladness either. Another thing culture lies to us about is to tell us that riches can provide these things, but riches can't provide what we're talking about here either. Isn't it shocking that when this happens, Haman goes right to murderous intent? I mean, he's the second in command of the largest kingdom, Persia. He's second in command, and the only thing that he thinks is going to solve this problem is to murder a man. That should shock us. He had plenty of options. I mean, when he sees him sitting there, he could just say, I'm going to give you a new job in the most remote part of the kingdom. Follow me. He doesn't even think that's an option. In this moment, he doesn't consider selling him into slavery. We're going to see next chapter that Esther says, look, if we were just sold into slavery, I wouldn't even try and come to you, king, and talk about this. But he's wanting to kill us. I have no other option. He doesn't consider just firing Mordecai, just getting rid of him. No, he wants to murder him. It shows us how fast, if we don't deal with our anger, if we don't deal with these things in a right way, how bad things can get really fast. As I consider these things about how Christians need to respond to this text in some ways, I just want to encourage us that sometimes I think we get the feeling, and when I say we, I really mean me. Let me just be honest with you. I'm preaching to myself here. Sometimes we feel as though as soon as we leave these doors on Sunday, it's not going to take long before our joy and happiness and gladness is gone. 15 minutes out in the world, all of a sudden, all the grace that we experience in here on a Sunday morning, interacting with one another, worshiping God, praising God, raising our hands, humbling ourselves before God, fellowshipping with one another, it can almost evaporate that quickly. Sometimes I feel like that I'm a lot like Haman in this way, that I walk out these doors and all of a sudden I feel like grace just isn't up to the task that's set out before me. My job is too stressful. My home life is so chaotic. How can grace survive in an atmosphere like that? But we need to remember one of the things that we're learning in this book is grace is more than enough. When we turn to God in faith and receive grace, it is more than enough. And you might ask, how do you know that? Well, look at Esther. Esther was pulled away from her family in chapter 2, taken to the palace, put through a year-long exercise of beautification to be married to a pagan king, and grace has been enough for her every step of the way. Look at Mordecai. The decree has gone out. The command has been given. The date has been set on which they are supposed to die. He's still going to work. He's fasting. He's praying. He's receiving grace. He's going to work. Haman sees him there, and it makes him mad. And I just want to encourage us that God sends us out into this world with abundant grace. I know some of you are in tough situations, and I know some of you are in a difficult spot, but you need to know that God's grace is enough for you in every and all situations. And you might be saying, how do I know that? I mean, probably there's tons of verses we could go to, but the one that came to my mind that really drives the point home that I want us to really grasp onto is the Great Commission, Matthew 28, 19, and 20. Go into the world. Then Jesus says, I will be with you till the end of the age. What is the grace that we need? It is the presence of Christ in our life. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. He is there with us on the brightest day and the darkest night. Christ is with us. Consider the words again in verse 9. Look at them. It says, and Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. Now, by nature, I'm kind of a melancholy kind of person, so I just have to ask myself, or I just wonder if Haman is somewhat like me. I wonder what his disposition is like. Is he prone to have real highs and real lows like I am? When he gets out of his bubble, out of his routine, out of his natural element, does he struggle like I do? Because it sure seems like he kind of does. He feels good in the party, but not so good when he's walking home and sees one man not rising up before him and trembling before him. Some days for him, he might be at peace, and other days he might find himself very troubled. Some days he's happy, and other days he might be terribly angry. Some days he might be content, and some days he might find himself terribly discontented. On this day, up until this moment, though, he was happy, he was joyful, he was glad because he had been at a dinner with the king and the queen. He was rubbing shoulders with some pretty high up people. And here we see that he's not so happy just because he had good food and wine. It goes deeper than that. No, he's really happy in this moment because a moment like this kind of told him that he's somebody, he's special, he's important. And in a person's heart like Haman, everything rides on that. He's important because of these sort of dinners that he's invited to. And what we see in this is that Haman is a prideful, arrogant, conceited man. The joy and gladness of a proud man can quickly disappear, as we see in our text today. One little thing gets in the way, and all of a sudden, that sort of joy and gladness and peace just evaporates. Because one man doesn't stand up and show him honor and revere him. Because one man doesn't tremble in his presence. I kind of like to think about that this week. I've been around people that made me tremble. I've never been around like movie stars or famous people. But I tell you, my old construction boss used to make me tremble. He signed my paychecks. I used to wonder why I trembled around him because Dean Prohaska is not that big of a guy. I'm probably a good 8 inches taller than him at times, it felt like. But I trembled before him. But you know what? He never took pleasure in seeing me tremble around him. But Haman is the kind of guy who wants to see you tremble. And that's pretty pathetic. You know, no wonder Jesus is such an offense to the unbeliever, to the person who refuses to humble themselves before him and tremble before him. Because at the end of the day, Jesus does sit on his throne, and Jesus will rule and reign by his word. But an unbeliever doesn't care about any of that. They'd rather sit on the throne of their own heart And they would rather never tremble before God. Rather, they would rather see people tremble before them. And that's what we see going on with Haman. But Christian, can I just encourage you, admonish you, that your greatest happiness, your greatest joy, your greatest gladness will happen not when people stand up in your presence or tremble before you, but your greatest joy, happiness, and gladness will come when you surrender to Christ and when you obey his word. That's where true joy, gladness, and happiness and peace comes from. A life that is surrendered to him. Then we see the first chiasm end with Mordecai being pleased when he is told that he should kill Mordecai. He believes that if he does this, then all of a sudden he can have joy again. He can all of a sudden feel glad again. He can take pleasure in all of these blessings that he has around him. But again, let me draw an application from this. Do not believe for 1 second the lie that tells you that by sinning, you will be more happy. That by sinning, you will be more glad. That by sinning, you will be more content, because that's what he's believing right now. But we need to be clear, murder does not profit you. A divorce will really not make you happier in the long run. Theft really doesn't enrich a person. Idolatry really won't make you happy and bring you joy. Whatever the thoughts in your mind can be, that if you engage in this sin, you will find pleasure, we all know, whatever that is, it's just not true. Because we've experienced it time and time again. He needs to stop listening to these things. But he doesn't, and this brings us to our next chiasm. Haman's anger against Mordecai. That's the theme of the second chiasm. In this section, we see that Haman is angry against Mordecai simply because he doesn't stand and tremble in his presence. And we see in this that the result of this, he is an egotistical, arrogant man. He's not a humble man at all. Haman can't imagine a day when he would actually have to bow before somebody like Mordecai. More than that, he can't imagine a day when he would ever have to bow his heart before Haman's God. The tragedy of this is that in less than 24 hours, he will be dead. And in less than 24 hours, he will find himself before God, face to face, truly humbled, trembling. And the sad part of that is he has no mediator between him and God at this point. All of these things are happening so that he might humble himself and turn, but he doesn't. And he's pleased with it because he doesn't have a good grasp of what the reality really is. In less than 24 hours, he will be dead and facing judgment. Hebrews 9:27. It is destined for men to live once, and after that comes judgment. So this man who took so much pleasure in seeing others tremble before him will in 24 hours find himself before a holy, righteous God, and he will tremble. Isaiah chapter 19, verse 1 is in my devotions a couple weeks ago, and it kind of sticks out to me about this. This is what it says. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt. And listen to what happens. And the idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. That stuck out to me because I appreciate the fact that God is who God is. I appreciate the fact that when he comes into my life, things tremble. In fact, this has become one of my prayers lately since I read this, is God, draw close to me while I try and draw close to you so that all the idols in my life will begin to tremble and I can see them for what they are and we can deal with them together. We're told that Haman restrains himself in this moment. He's angry at Mordecai, but he restrains himself. And now he's not noble in restraining himself here, but it is an opportunity for him to simmer down and cool off, right? I mean, you would hope that's what's going to happen, that he sees him, he's angry, he restrains himself, he doesn't take immediate action against Mordecai, he continues to walk home, and maybe he is going to simmer down, maybe he is going to cool off, but he doesn't, and he doesn't because he does two things that actually make this situation worse. The first thing that he does is he calls people to come around him who aren't going to help him in this moment. He's like the king in chapter 1 and chapter 2. There's no good advisors around these guys to give them godly advice in this moment. And the second thing is that Haman continues to dwell on these things. We've all experienced this, right? Maybe in the last 48 hours, something happens to us and we have a moment to restrain ourselves, but we just keep playing it over and over in our head, preaching it to ourselves time and time again. And instead of our heart chilling out and cooling down, instead of praying about it and applying grace, all of a sudden it just burns into an inferno that can't be stopped, and our anger just explodes. And that's what we see going on. Look at verse 14. This is the advice that he gets that leads to disaster, because when you mix these two things together, bad advice and a heart set on fire with anger, it's going to lead to problems. Verse 14, then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. That's the end of the second chiasm. This is the advice that is given. This is how he is going to regain his joy, his peace. Doesn't your skin just crawl? If this is a real conversation going on around kitchen tables and work tables and political tables, it should make us uncomfortable. And we know these conversations are going on. So let's look at the third one. The third chiasm talks about two invitations in our text. Look at verse 10. This is where Haman returns home and invites his wife and his friends to join him. It says, and he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh. So that's the first invitation. And then in verse 12, we have the second invitation. This is where he's recalling the two invitations that he's received from the king and the queen to go to these parties. It says, then Haman said, even Queen Esther let no one but me come with the king to the feast she had prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. In other words, Haman restrained himself when he saw Mordecai at the gate, and we would want to commend him for that. But here's the reality. He did not restrain his anger, and he did not restrain his lips in that moment, and so it's going to explode. There's two problems in this chiasm. The first one is this. Everyone around that table encourages him to kill a man. There's nobody that stands up and says, this is bad advice. What has Mordecai done? Just fire the guy. Nobody stands up. They're all terrible counselors. Secondly, this one might surprise you. The second problem is that the Lord does not provide anyone in this moment who can turn Haman from this evil. Does that kind of shock you? God can provide somebody in moments like these to get our attention. He doesn't provide anybody. Let me tell you why I put this in here. It's because of 1 Samuel 25. There was a day in David's life when David was protecting a man named Nabal and all of his stuff. David and his men had been watching out for them, and nothing had been taken, nothing was missing. And so at one point, David sent his guys to go and receive payment for their protection. And in that moment, Nabal, in his foolish heart, says, who's David that I should give him anything? And he insulted David and his men. And when David heard about this, his wrath stirred up in his heart so much that he grabbed his men, they got on their horses, they began to ride towards Nabal's house, and he intended to kill Nabal and every other male in his family by nightfall. This is a desperate situation. This is a bad situation. David is mad, he's been insulted, and he rides off. But Nabal's wife hears about this, and she knows that her husband is foolish. She grabs some cakes and she grabs some food and different things, and she loads them up, and she rides out to meet David, and she intercepts David with these gifts, and she gets off and she humbles herself before him. She repents on behalf of her foolish husband. And listen to David's response in 1 Samuel 25, verse 32. And David said to Abigail, now listen to what he says, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me." This wasn't just a good idea for Abigail. It was wise. It saved a ton of people. But David first says, thank God that he sent you to me this day. God was behind this. And then he says, blessed be your discretion and blessed be you. You have kept me this day from blood guilt and working salvation with my own hand. Now, in my mind, after this event, David's life changes. I could be wrong on that, but as I read through Samuel, it seems like his life changes after this. Like God tempers him in this moment to show him where his anger can lead him if it goes unchecked. And this event reminded him that God will be faithful to send people in our life at times to stop us, but we need to learn the lesson. We can't expect God to send somebody there time and time again if we refuse to deal with our heart. And David realized this. He changed from that point on. In fact, just a short time later, David has the opportunity to kill Saul. And his men are encouraging him, kill Saul. He's been given into your hand. God has given him into your hand, David. Did David do it? He didn't do it. In our text, there's no Abigail-type person there to help in this moment. And the irony of it is God is sending Abigail-type people into this book. King Ahasuerus needed an Abigail-type person in this moment. Chapter 1 and chapter 2, he had no wise people to give him good counsel, but God began to send Esther into his life, who can keep the king from being responsible for a terrible amount of blood guilt if the Jews were all killed. So God can send people into these situations, but he's not doing it here. Haman has surrounded himself with people who give him wicked counsel, and we're told that he's pleased with it. And you know what I take this to mean? Even if God sent somebody like Abigail into this moment, he would have brushed it off. He wouldn't have listened to wise counsel. He would have just done it. Who are you to tell me not to kill this guy? He deserves it. I'm going to build the gallows now, and tomorrow I'm going to get the king's approval, and it will be done. So let me ask you a few questions. First, what can be done when these sort of things happen? When people like Haman seem to have all the power in the world, what can stop an evil plan like this from being carried out against a righteous person who doesn't even know this is going on? What can happen when the oppressed have this sort of thing going on all around them in this evil world, and Esther's not even aware of it, so she can't intervene? Who's going to intervene in this situation? And the good news is the Lord will act. The Lord will act. Why is this story in Esther? Why is God letting this all play out? And I think one of the reasons why I can see that God lets these things play out the way it is to show us you can depend on Esther, you can depend on Mordecai, but ultimately you still have to depend upon me, because they won't always be around, but I will be. This portion of the text causes us, or should cause us, to desire three things. First, we should desire to call people around us who can give us good counsel. We should want, when we need it the most, to be able to call upon certain individuals who we know will not stoke the flames of our anger, but will actually calm us down and bring peace. Secondly, every day we should really stop and pray, God, would you send people into my life who will be like an Abigail when I need it the most? Will you send somebody into my life when I can't reach out to somebody in that moment and I'm about to say something foolish or do something foolish? Would you send somebody into my life today? and ask God to do that. And thirdly, each and every one of us in here ought to want to be somebody like Abigail. And when people come to us in a moment of intense anger or any other strong emotion, we ought to want to be a calming factor in their life. Not somebody that will just stoke the flames up and see what will happen. Let's look at the last one. This is the real problem. It's Haman's prideful and arrogant heart. This is in verse 11. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. See, this is his affections. This is what he loves. This is what he's drawn to. This is what he wants to think about all day long. It's not God. It's not his word. It's not his affection for the Lord. It's about all of these wonderful things. And he's not even going to give thanks to God for these things. These are what he's done with his life. These are his good fortunes. When Haman decides to speak, he doesn't deal with his anger. He doesn't evaluate his heart and deal with the pride that's there. No, he just lets it all out. I'm a little bit convicted on this part of the story because how many times have I done this recently? In the moment when I should just be more wise to keep my mouth shut, I let my mouth go, and all of a sudden my conceited, arrogant, prideful heart is made known to everybody to see. Haman gets joy from these external things. Haman gets angered when these external things affect him. He boasts of 4 things in this verse. And in the immediate context, he boasts in 5 things. He boasts in the splendor of his riches. He's a rich man. He's able to pay the king 10,000 talents of silver, tons and tons of silver. He's rich. He can build a gallows 70 feet tall in one night. He's rich. He boasts in the number of his sons, because in that culture, the more sons you had, the more blessed you were, the more honor you deserved. And he had 10 sons. Little does he know they're all going to die in less than a year. He talks about his promotions and the honor that he has received from the king. He boasts about it. And then he boasts about how he alone, of all the king's officials and servants, have been invited to these feasts. Truly, Haman has enjoyed many blessings, but he can't even enjoy these because of one man. Because one man won't stand up and tremble before him. They're locked out from him being able to enjoy. What irony there is in that, right? All these blessings, all these privileges, all this power, and by his own admission, he can't enjoy it because of one man who's righteous. Haman's at the peak of his power, his authority, and his influence, and he can't enjoy any of it, and in 24 hours, he will be dead. And as a result of him complaining about all of these things, his wife says in verse 14, "Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast." This idea pleased Haman, and he made the gallows. Haman shows us in our text today how difficult it is to find joy and peace when you have a proud, unbelieving heart that will not turn to the Lord. He's a picture of this problem. If we won't humble ourselves, if we won't come to the Lord, we can't have joy and gladness. Let me put it this way. If we refuse to go to the throne of grace, which was erected for us to go to in moments such as these, then we will do foolish things like Haman and erect a 70-foot tall platform on which to kill our enemies with. So let me read you a section from John Flavel, one of my favorite authors. He has a book on dealing with hard issues, the very thing Haman won't do here. And this is what he says. I meant to make a slide and I just forgot, so let me read it to you. "Carnal and formal people take no heed of this. They cannot be brought to confer with their own hearts. There are some people who have lived 40 or 50 years in the world and have scarcely had an hour's discourse with their own hearts. Can you imagine that? To be 50 years old and not really even spend an hour trying to see what's really going on in my heart? That's what Prideful is saying. He says, it is a hard thing to bring a man and himself together on such business. But saints know those soliloquies, to be very salutary. The heathen could say, the soul is made wise by sitting still in quietness. Though bankrupts care not to go to look at the accounts, yet upright hearts will know whether they go backward or forward. I commune with my heart, says David. The heart can never be kept until it is first examined and understood. Haman will never have joy and never have gladness, never really have peace unless he goes there. But he won't. Prideful is describing the difference between people like Mordecai and people like Haman. Haman will not consider his heart. He believes that all of his problems are external. They're not internal. They don't have to do with me. They have to do with other people. They're the problem, not me. But Mordecai reflects upon his own heart, and that causes him to turn to the Lord. And how do I know that's the case? Because we've already seen this happen in the book of Esther. Let me just remind you. Esther almost fell into this trap of trying to deal with everything through external means. Back in Esther chapter 4, verse 4, we're told that she heard that Mordecai was in the city square lamenting in sackcloth and ashes. And do you remember what she wanted to do in that moment? She wanted him to change clothes. That'll solve the problem. Put on some new clothes so you can come in closer to the palace. Everything gets better when you're in the palace. That's where the parties happen. And in that moment, Mordecai refused to do it. In effect saying, no, this problem, it's not external. This problem is internal. Mordecai showed Esther that these things are heart issues and they need to be addressed at that level. And they need to go to God and find his grace and apply their faith to these things. And so he says to her in chapter 4, verse 13, do not think to yourself. He challenges what she's thinking. He says, do not think to yourself that in the king's house you will escape. In other words, he tells Esther to watch her heart in this moment because her heart's going to lie to her. Her heart is going to deceive her in this moment. Her heart is going to give her avenues to get out of this situation. But she has good counsel in this moment from Mordecai. And because Mordecai does this with her, they choose in this moment to humble themselves before the Lord and to fast and to put it in God's hands. So let me give you 4 applications from our text. First, you have to keep watch over your heart. You have to do this. Each and every one of you have to watch your heart. Wife, you can't do this for your husband. Husband, you can't do this for your wife. We have to take responsibility for our own heart. You know what you're thinking. Your spouse doesn't. I prove that every day of my life. You have to watch your heart and what you're saying to yourself. This is your primary responsibility. And the majority of the struggles that you and I face are heart issues, not external issues. These things trigger our hearts, but our heart is the issue. So we have to remember that. We need to listen to what we're saying to ourselves. And we need to measure what we're saying to ourselves by the Word of God. Not even by the counsel that's going on all around us if it's bad counsel. Proverbs 12:15, the way of a fool is right in his eyes, but a wise man seeks advice. See, I'm naturally foolish. Left to myself, everything I think seems right. So I need to be in the Word so that I realize how foolish I am. Secondly, surround yourself with others who will help you keep watch over your heart. We do need to surround ourselves with people who will be there for us in these sort of moments, so that in these moments we will have good godly counsel that will cool us down and chill us out, point us to Christ, and remember that he who was reviled did not revile in return. Walk in his footsteps. 1 Peter chapter 2. Thirdly, be the type of person who will watch over the heart of others. We do need to be responsible for the hearts of those around us, how we're interacting with them, what counsel we are given. You know, one of the main motivations you and I ought to have, just on a practical level, to be in the Word every day, so you can give better counsel that day to the people who really desperately need it, so that you're not just giving them your own opinions. And lastly, we need to pray often that the Lord would intervene in moments like these by sending somebody into our life that can help us in these desperate moments. Didn't Jesus teach us to pray this way? Lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from evil. And one of the ways he does that is by sending Abigail's or Esther's or Mordecai's, Jim Swanson's, Justin's, Mindy's, all of you into my life to help. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this text. Father, you have written this book in such an amazing way, even putting it in a chiasm to draw our attention to the fact that our hearts can so easily deceive us and lead us astray. And when fully embraced, when that becomes our greatest affection, we're in trouble. So, Father, I pray that we would learn from Haman's mistake here, that we would not follow down that same path. I pray, Father God, that we would turn to you, that we would pray often to you, that we would allow our lives to be led by you through the counsel of your word and the gift of the Holy Spirit that has been given to us to lead us into truth. May we embrace all of these things and humble ourselves and tremble before you. Father, I pray that as we draw close to you and you draw close to us, the idols in our heart and the lies that we speak to ourselves would begin to tremble and our hearts would melt so that we could deal with the idolatry that is in each and every one of our lives. Help us to take these things seriously. Father, I thank you for the beauty of this text today. I thank you for how we've learned that you are involved in every one of these situations. When things are spoken in private among powerful people, influential people, wealthy people, you can intervene. And you're not limited in how you can do it. And so, Lord, help us to trust you. Help us. It's one thing to say this in church, but help us, as soon as we walk out this door, to trust you in the coming moments, in the coming days, in the rest of our life. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.